making the introduction.
Hello and welcome to a pre-recorded Speakers for Schools virtual talk. We're delighted to announce that we have Robin Lustig, journalist and broadcaster. Today, he'll be speaking about the election of Barack Obama. This talk would be suitable for Key Stage 5 or S5 to 6, or those studying politics, history, or considering a career in journalism. Thank you, and over to Robin.
Christabel, thank you very much. And hello to everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, whatever it is when you are listening to this. It's a great pleasure to do this. Slightly odd doing it in this way. I would much prefer to be doing it with you face to face, but for obvious reasons, we can't do it that way. Let me just tell you a bit about myself before we get into the talk itself. As Christabel said, I am a journalist and broadcaster. I have been a journalist, unbelievably, for nearly 50 years now. So I've been to a lot of places and I've met a lot of people. And the wonderful thing about being a journalist is that you do get to meet some very interesting people and you do go to some very interesting places. Particularly, you go to these places at very interesting times. So over the course of my career, I've actually traveled to more than 90 different countries around the world. I've reported from every continent on Earth, with one exception, and that's Antarctica. Still hope to get there one day. And as I say, I've met a lot of interesting people. Just to give you a couple of examples of historic events that I've witnessed, when Germany was reunified in 1990, after the end of the Cold War, I was in Berlin. When the Soviet Union came to an end in 1991, I was in Moscow. And I saw the end of that era. And when Hong Kong was handed back to China by the United Kingdom in 1997, I was there to watch that happening as well. What I've enjoyed most, I think, in all of my travels and all of my journalism is reporting on elections. I'm a great election addict, and I'll explain why in a few moments. In any democracy, elections are a moment of real drama, often a moment of real change. I've reported on elections in many, many different countries, just about every country in Europe, I think, at one point or another. Various other countries, for example, Iran, Pakistan, Nigeria, Turkey, Israel, Russia, South Africa, many, many more. And what all of those elections have in common is that people vote in the hope of effecting some kind of change. They want to make their country better. And in many countries, of course, which don't have a long democratic tradition like we do here, it's a moment of real excitement because people have a chance to make their own views heard. So, having said all that, I thought what I would do today is talk to you about one particular election, which was particularly significant and particularly historic. It was the election of Barack Obama as the President of the United States in 2008. He was then re-elected 4 years later in 2012, but of course, because that was a re-election, it was less historic. The thing about elections is that they do often make a real difference. And the election of Barack Obama made a particular difference because he was the first Black president to be elected in the United States. Now that was significant not only for the US, but for many other countries around the world as well. Because if you think about it, no other country, with one exception, had elected somebody from a minority community to be their head of government, and as in the US, also their head of state, because the President of the United States is not only the head of government, which for us would be Boris Johnson, but also their head of state, which for us would be the Queen. So a particularly significant figure in two different ways. And to elect somebody from a minority community to such an important and significant position was a genuinely historic moment. 2008, after all, was less than 150 years after the abolition of slavery in the United States. Less than 150 years before Obama was elected, black people in the US were slaves. Less than 50 years before he was elected, black people in the United States were very often living in segregation. They were not allowed legally to do things that white people could do. In some states, for example, they couldn't sit on a park bench that a white person could sit on. They couldn't go into a coffee shop that white people went into for a coffee. In some states, if they were sitting at the front of a bus and a white person got on, they were told to move to the back. That was all happening less than 50 years before Obama was elected. So, an enormously significant moment, as I say. And the reason I think, above all, that Obama was elected was that he offered hope to the people of the United States, and he offered change for the better. And he had a particular slogan, which I think I can now show you, which was very simply this one here. Let's see if I can get the right slide up. It was that one. Yes, we can. Very simple, offering the opportunity to voters to make a change for the better. And this was another one of his slogans, just simply the one word, hope. So that really encapsulated what his message was. The president for the 8 years before 2008 was President George W. Bush. He was much older than Obama. Obama was only 47 years old, which for a president is actually quite young. He wasn't the youngest man ever to be elected in the United States. Bill Clinton and John F. Kennedy had both been a little bit younger, but George W. Bush, for example, was already in his 60s by 2008. And if you compare that to what's happening in the United States this year, when you've got Donald Trump, who is 74, his likely challenger, Joe Biden, is 77. So very much older, two old white guys, not to put too fine a point on it. And so Obama was, of course, very, very different. So let me get rid of that slide for now, if I can. Just bear with me 1 second. Never mind, we'll leave it up. Where was I? Yes, so Obama is elected in 2008. I was there, and I was there because I wanted to be there. I'd always been fascinated by American politics right from when I was actually a student. When I was at university, I studied politics, and I was particularly interested in American politics because it always seemed to be so much bigger and so much more exciting than anything else. America, after all, is an enormously important country, even if we're not American, even if we don't live there. It's the biggest economy in the world. It has the most powerful military in the world, so it can make its presence felt all around the world if that is what it wants to do. It also has enormous cultural influence, if you think about it. The clothes that we wear, our baseball caps, our trainers, our T-shirts, the slogans that we put on our T-shirts, the music we listen to, the movies we watch, the television programs, the video games, so much of that comes from America. So it does have enormous influence. That's why I think American politics are so interesting. And when they choose a president, they choose somebody who is really going to have an impact on the rest of the world. When you have an election in the United States, it's actually two moments of great historical significance. There's election day itself, when voters actually go and cast their vote. But unlike here, the person who is elected doesn't take over right away. The election is always in November. It's the first Tuesday after the 1st of November. That's enshrined in law every 4 years. But the new president doesn't take office until the following January. And it's always January the 20th. So this year, there is going to be an election in the United States to elect a president, either Donald Trump for his second term or Joe Biden, who was, as it happens, Obama's vice president. And whoever wins will not take office until the 20th of January next year. So you've got election day itself, and then you've got what they called Inauguration Day, which is the following January. And I was in America for both of those occasions in 2008, 2009. Let me tell you a little bit about my memories of Election Day itself. I was working for the BBC at that time, and I was one of about, I think, 200 BBC people who were in Washington, DC, a huge number of people. Because, of course, the BBC doesn't only broadcast here in the UK, it broadcasts all around the world, and it broadcasts in many, many different languages, more than 40 different languages. So all of those people needed to be in America to report on the genuinely historic moment. We thought Obama was going to win, and we knew that if he did win, it would be of immense interest right around the world. Just as one sidebar, Obama's father was in fact born in Kenya in East Africa, and my daughter was living in Kenya at the time, and she reported to me that there was probably as much interest in Kenya in that election as there was in the United States. And the day after Obama was elected, she actually went to the village where his father's mother, his paternal grandmother, had lived, where they regarded the election of an American president whose ancestors came from their village as an absolutely wonderful occasion. But anyway, I was in Washington, and of course I spent hours and hours and hours in a in a radio studio, I should say, broadcasting the results, because like here, the results come in slowly during the course of the night. In America, state by state, there are, as you know, 50 different states in the United States of America. So a whole night of results, immense excitement, and then right through the next day. But I did go out at some point during, during the night to try to get a feel of what was actually happening out on the streets. And I went to a quite well-known coffee shop in a part of Washington, which is where mainly Black Americans lived. And it was a party like I'd never seen before. I mean, they were absolutely overjoyed that for the first time in America's history, a Black president had been elected. Not only in America was there excitement, though. Let me just give you an indication of the sorts of reactions that you got from around the world. Newspaper headlines. Look at this. Well, this is the New York Times. So Obama, one word headline. This is the main newspaper in the United States. They don't often have just one word in their headline. This is the Times, the London Times, the New World. America elects Barack Obama its first Black president. You don't often see a headline like that in the Times. This is the Sun, a new dawn. Obama is first Black president. And then look how many pages of reports they've got. Pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 32 and 33. You don't often get that much politics in the Sun. This is La Vanguardia. This is a Spanish newspaper, a new era. Huge photograph of Obama. This is Der Tagesspiegel, a German newspaper. Barack Obama, America's new president. You see that word change there, the word that was so closely identified with him. This is the Standard. This is a Kenyan newspaper, as I was saying. Huge excitement in Kenya. The Obama sensation. Look at all those photographs of people in a great state of excitement. This is Le Monde, the French newspaper. America has chosen Barack Obama. Special report, 12 pages on the 44th president of the United States. And down on the right-hand side, there's a column headlined "The Man Who Was Needed." So even in France, they regarded him as a really genuinely new figure. Now, this is a collection of newspapers from Malaysia. No real reason why in Malaysia they should be so interested, but look at those headlines. Change has come, historic victory, change it is. So right around the world then, huge interest in Barack Obama and what he represented. There was a big question, even the day after he was elected. Okay, symbolically, it was of immense importance, a Black president, but how much real difference would he make to all the millions of Black Americans, many of whom still living in poverty, many of whom still being discriminated against You've only got to look at what's been happening in the US over the last couple of weeks. I'm recording this in early June, and for the last several nights, we've been watching on our television screens the most terrible scenes of unrest, of protests, of riots in some cases, after the killing of a black man by white police officers. Not, unfortunately, an unusual occurrence, even after Obama's election. Let's scroll forward now to January of 2009, Inauguration Day, the day when Obama would actually become the president of the United States. I was back in America, but I wasn't in Washington. I decided not to go where all the other journalists were going. I went to Alabama, which is in the deep south of the United States, and which for many, many years was the crucible of segregation, where black Americans were most discriminated against, where white supremacists were most powerful. They had a governor in Alabama, the head of the state of Alabama, called George Wallace, who was an arch segregationist and who was elected on a policy which he spelt out very clearly: segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And by segregation, what he meant was white supremacy. Whites in all the positions of authority and of power, blacks kept separately. I don't know, as I'm talking to you, how many of you are white, how many of you are black. I'm sure all of you, though, can see what an important change it is in a place like Alabama, where so many people in their own lifetimes had experienced discrimination of that kind, to see a black man in the White House. I have a very clear memory of going to a church in the biggest city in Alabama, Birmingham, on the Sunday before Obama's inauguration. It was a Baptist church, the 16th Street Baptist Church, very, very well known in America because in the 1960s, it was the target of an attack by white supremacists of the Ku Klux Klan, and 4 young black girls were killed in a bomb explosion. It was one of the most appalling attacks of that period. And I went to a church service in that church on the Sunday before Obama's inauguration. And I remember the preacher, wonderful, charismatic orator, talking to the congregation about the significance of what was about to happen. And he came up with a great line. He said, "Many of us will remember when we were in the back of the bus. Now we're in the White House." And in that one sentence, he just spelled out so clearly and so simply the change that Obama's election represented. There were people in Alabama that day in his congregation who remembered not being allowed to sit on the same park bench as a white person, not being allowed to send their children to the same school as white children, not being allowed to do the same jobs as white people. And there was a black man in the White House. I went on Inauguration Day to watch the ceremonies in Washington on a huge screen that had been erected in a huge auditorium. There were about 6,000 people with me in that auditorium, all of them black, all of them there to watch this historic moment. And I remember turning to a woman next to me. She was probably in her late 50s, so she remembered the days of segregation. And I said to her, okay, this guy up there in the White House, yes, he is a new face, and yes, of course, it is significant, but you know, his father was a Kenyan from Africa. His mother actually was white. He was born in Hawaii, which isn't even mainland United States. It's a group of islands halfway out across the Pacific Ocean. He spent part of his childhood in Indonesia. He's not like the vast majority of African Americans. His own heritage was not slavery. He came from a different background. He then went to Harvard University, one of the most prestigious universities. He studied law. He became a law professor. He then also became a community activist. And I said to her, what does that man genuinely have in common with you? And she looked at me and she just said, just look at him. He looks like us. And that's what it really was. He symbolized the moment when a man who looked like so many millions of African Americans was actually in the White House. Now, how much did he actually change? Well, he changed some things symbolically. He was a great speaker. He still is a great speaker. You may have heard him speak just within the last few days. He is a great speaker. But did he right all the wrongs in the United States? No, he certainly didn't. Did he help the position of millions of African Americans who were still being discriminated against? Well, perhaps at the margins he did. One thing he managed to do was reform the healthcare system so that many poorer Americans had access to healthcare. They don't have anything like the National Health Service that we have. Most Americans have to pay for their healthcare. And of course, if you don't have much money, that is a real issue. So he did manage to make some difference there. He is a gentle reformer. He is a moderate. He made some changes, not a lot of changes. Let me just read you something that he said just a few days ago, referring to all of the unrest we've seen in America just over the last few days, and addressing the protesters directly. He said this: "I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter, that your dreams matter. And when I go home and I look at the faces of my daughters, Sasha and Malia, and I look at my nephews and nieces, I see limitless potential that deserves to flourish and thrive." It's a big contrast to what Donald Trump had been saying at about the same time, when he was referring to the protesters, or at least to those of them who were involved in some of the violence and some of the looting that happened, as professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, and criminals. So for me, and as you probably have gathered, I was a great supporter of Barack Obama. You have a man there who tries to reach out to Americans, tries to unify, tries to bring them together against the current president, Donald Trump, who seems more often to want to divide them. The last thing I would say to you is this: elections matter. Elections can bring change. I do believe that the election of Barack Obama brought change. I do believe that he represented a very important moment, not only for the United States, but for all over the world, because he showed that it is possible for somebody from a minority to be elected to high political office. What happened on that day in 2008 was that large numbers of white Americans voted for a black man. And nobody knew until that moment that that was possible. I don't want to exaggerate, because I need to give you the figures. More white people did not vote for him than did vote for him. The numbers are 43% of whites voted for him, but 55% didn't. Compare that to how black Americans voted. 95% of black Americans voted for Barack Obama, and 67% of Hispanics, Spanish-speaking Americans, in other words, 2/3, voted for Barack Obama. So yes, he was obviously the favored candidate of minorities, but on its own, that wouldn't have been enough. Sufficient numbers of white Americans voted for him as well. Ask yourself this: have we had a black prime minister in the United Kingdom? No, we haven't. Has France had a black president? Has Germany had a black chancellor? Answer: no. The only other country in the world which has elected a president from a minority community is Peru in South America, where they elected a president called Fujimori, who came from a Japanese background. There is actually quite a significant Japanese minority in Peru. You probably didn't know that. But that all ended badly because he was very corrupt and was finally sent to jail. So Obama is still an extremely unusual example of a politician from a minority who was elected to be not only head of government, but only head of state. I will leave you with this thought, I think. In my view, the election of Obama, obviously not the end of the road towards equality and justice for minority communities in the United States, but I do believe a very important step along it. And for that reason, I think it's worth looking back at what happened. It was 12 years ago. I know that's quite a long time ago, but I certainly remember it very, very well as a moment of real hope and real change. And I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really, really interesting, and also very interesting slides on the election of Barack Obama. So we do have a couple of questions for you. The first question is, what first got you interested in journalism and to become a journalist?
Gosh, even as a very young child, I was curious about just about everything. I know all children ask questions, but apparently I asked more questions than most. My mother used to say that I drove her mad asking questions all the time. So I was very curious. And of course, that is quite a useful quality for a journalist to have. You need to want to know about things. I also always liked writing. I liked writing stories as a child. And then when I grew a bit older, I liked writing about things I'd seen or heard. And that's the other thing which you need to do as a journalist. You need to ask questions, you need to find out what's going on, and then you need to tell everybody about it. I always say that it's the ideal job for anybody who loves gossip. You poke your nose into other people's business and then you tell everybody about it. It goes beyond that, of course, but that's the basis. I was always curious. I always loved reading newspapers. I can remember kneeling on the floor as a child reading a newspaper because I still wasn't big enough to hold the pages of the newspaper open. My arms weren't long enough. So I'd kneel on the floor with the newspaper on the floor in front of me and read what was going on.
Right. Fantastic. Yes. That is a good point. You have to be curious to be able to do this type of profession. So yeah, and the second question is, why did you choose to cover politics? What interests you about politics?
I think what interests me most about politics is that it helps if you analyze politics, if you study politics, if you look at how politics works, you begin to understand a little bit about why the world that we live in is the way it is. The thing about governments is that they make decisions which affect our everyday lives. At its most basic, they decide how much we have to pay in tax. So when we go out to work and we get paid for that work, some of it gets taken away from us again in taxes. And then the government decides what to do with that money that it's taken away from us, how much of it will spend on a health service, how much of it will spend on schools, how much of it will spend on building roads, on providing pensions, on providing welfare for people who need extra help. All those decisions are taken by politicians. All those decisions are made by people exercising politics. And if you believe, as I have believed throughout my life, that the world ought to be better than it is, then I have always thought it was worth trying to work out the best way to try to make it better, who to choose to make it better, and how to put pressure on them. So that's why I think, as I was suggesting, I've always been so fascinated by elections, because that is the moment when we are all given that opportunity to make a choice that could, in a small way, help to change the world.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that answer. My next question is, and why should young people in the UK take an interest in US politics? Why is that so important?
I referred to it in what I was saying just a few minutes ago. America is a very important country. It's a very powerful country. It's very wealthy. It has a huge army, which it uses from time to time. I mean, ask the people of Iraq, ask the people of Afghanistan about the power of the United States. So it affects our lives. And so much of what we buy, so much of what we listen to, what we see, comes from America. So it is important. And we follow America in many ways. There are lots of similarities between Britain and America. There are lots of differences as well. But there are similarities, not only that we speak almost the same language, but we have similar mindsets and we like similar things. So I do think America is important, and I do think it is worth trying to understand America. And I don't mean only the America of the big cities, not only the America of New York and Washington and Los Angeles and Chicago, but the America of the big middle, where millions and millions of Americans live, most of us overseas, almost invisibly. They live in small towns, small cities, and they are the ones who, for example, vote for Donald Trump, and they're the ones we tend to hear less of. And in 2008, leading up to the election of Barack Obama, I spent a lot of time in that America, and I talked to a lot of people who did not regard Barack Obama as a beacon of hope, but as something rather dangerous and rather alien. So I don't want to give the impression that everybody was as enthusiastic as I was about him, because they certainly weren't.
Thank you. Right, that is. Thank you again for that answer. So my next question is, what challenges have you faced in your role, and how did you overcome them?
Gosh, being a journalist is a pretty challenging occupation, because a lot of the time you want to find things out that people don't want you to find out. So you have to be quite imaginative sometimes in who you talk to and what you ask them. Sometimes I have been in quite dangerous places. For a period of time in the 1980s, I was based in the Middle East, and I spent a lot of time covering the civil war in Lebanon at that time. So that was quite dangerous in the very obvious way that there were bullets and bombs flying about. And so my life was endangered. I survived all that. So that was one challenge. The way I think in general that a journalist overcomes challenge is to be methodical, to be meticulous, to be careful, not to take unnecessary risks, but also not to worry too much about being unpopular. You know, there's a famous saying about blaming the messenger. People do blame the messenger. And so if you tell people things that they don't want to know, then they often don't say thank you. But it is the job of a journalist to tell people things sometimes that they don't want to know, but which it is important for them to know. Because going back to what I was saying about elections, I think we can only make informed decisions about who to vote for in an election if we are properly informed. And the people who inform us, by and large, are journalists. That is beginning to change, though. I mean, I need to accept that journalists, perhaps, their function in society has changed since the advent of social media. Because if you spend a lot of time on Twitter or Instagram or any of the other social media sites, you have access to so much more information than what is available just from journalists. So we journalists have even more of a challenge now than perhaps when I started, when journalists certainly knew more than most other people because they had access to people and places that most people didn't have access to. Now, everybody has access to far more information than just journalists. So the challenge really is to dig deeper, to dig more carefully, and to be more determined to uncover things which people in power would be much happier weren't uncovered.
Great, thank you. That's brilliant. So the final question is, what advice would you give young people now who would like to get into your industry, and what would they be studying, reading, or doing?
Well, first thing I need to say is that it's a tough business. It's a business which is unfortunately contracting rather than expanding. So there aren't a lot of job opportunities. On the other hand, it is worth pursuing if you think you're cut out for it. The best way of becoming a journalist, this might sound a little stupid, the best way to become a journalist is to become a journalist. So if you're in school, you start working on a school magazine or a school newspaper, or you start making videos for YouTube. If you are at college or university, you do a bit of journalism there. I don't necessarily think it's important to study journalism. When I was at university, donkeys years ago, you couldn't study journalism. It wasn't on offer. I think you study a subject that really interests you, and you do journalism in your spare time, as it were, but you begin to get experience. Then, if you get a taste for it, maybe you go on and you do a 1 or 2 year second course just in journalism. Now, I know that that's expensive, and I know that not everybody can afford to spend that much time as a student, but I do think it's important to study something other than journalism. Nothing wrong with studying journalism if that's what you want to do, but even more important in my book is actually to do it, to practice doing it, to make the mistakes early on so that you learn what works and what doesn't work. And then when you're looking for a job, you've actually got something to show a potential employer. You can say, look at this video on YouTube that I made, look at this article that I wrote for a student magazine, look at this newspaper that I edited at school or at university, whatever it might be. That's the way I would do it. But I do have to emphasize it's tough. There aren't many jobs available. It's a very insecure industry. Lots of journalists are being laid off, being made redundant. A lot of journalists now are freelance. They don't get a salary every month. They just get paid for the job that they do, which is a tough way to earn a living. It can be done, and there are plenty of people doing it, and there are lots of people having a great time doing it. But you've got to be pretty determined. You've got to be pretty sure that it is what you want to do, and then you get on and do it.
Thank you for that answer. Well, we've come to the end of the presentation. Robin, I want to thank you again so much for your time and for this very interesting topic. I'm sure students and teachers will definitely be useful to them. Thank you again, everyone, for watching, and we hope to see you at our next talk.